My name is Tyler Lescola, and this is my reflection on myself as a critical reader in Professor Hume's Experiencing Literature class. A good example for how I implemented reader response theory is The Handsomest Drowned Man in the World by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Before I even read the text, I recognized his name and associated him with the literary genre of magical realism, which made me expect that there would be hyperbole and surreal elements in the story, which there were. The eponymous drowned man was said to be far bigger than any ordinary man, so I interpreted this as a manifestation of the larger-than-life personality that the villagers bestowed upon him. I don't know much about the culture Marquez comes from or is writing about, but I do know about Greek mythology, so one interpretation I come up with about the story is that the drowned man, with his unearthly size and beauty, was actually meant to represent a primordial sea god. As such, I thought one moral of the story could be that people have the power to expropriate and rewrite history, and that they can use this power to their own benefit. Also important is being able to critically examine the components of a text to find meaning. My best instance of using critical reading strategies was in working with Eudora Welty's A Worn Path. I read that story several times in order to really closely analyze it, and every time I reread a certain passage, I would get new ideas and find new components of the text worth considering. The first time, I noticed there was a lot of death imagery in the story, and I wondered at the significance. Subsequently, I noticed how the withered cotton is repeatedly said to whisper, an example of personification, and how there is a buzzard, a bird which preys on dead animals. Finally, I made the connection that this segment of Phoenix's journey may be an allusion to a journey through hell, where the river she crosses might be an allusion to the river Styx, and the dead whispering field might be likened to the fields of Asphodel, all of which would contribute to the idea that this is a perilous quest that Phoenix is on, and yet she has done it many times before, a testament to her mettle. I find digital tools to be inessential to learning. We are perfectly capable of doing things analog. However, they can be extremely useful aids to learning, and they can be the catalyst to obtaining a more thorough learning experience. The digital tool I found most helpful in this class was using an online document to annotate a text. Completing annotations online was great because it was so much easier to keep my notes organized, and I was not constricted by whatever spatial limits the margins of a hard copy would have presented. Another useful digital tool was the online blog, used for posting discussions about our independent reading. For my independent reading, I read Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, and I actually made a connection between one of Bradbury's characters, Captain Beatty, and the character Shrike from the book Miss Lonely Hearts, which I had just read in another class. Both characters are highly adept rhetoricians, whose cutting criticisms plunge the protagonists into inner turmoil. Moreover, both are highly savant in the subjects they so vehemently decry. For Shrike, that would be religion, and for Beatty, books. I am certain that Beatty was directly inspired by Shrike. Finding that connection was a moment of success for me, but I also had some challenges this semester too. Back to Welty's A Worn Path, I had noticed a plethora of death-related imagery, but in retrospect I think I went astray in my pessimistic interpretation of it, taking it to mean that Phoenix was doomed. I failed to see the hope in the story, how Phoenix overcame all of her trials, and how nature was actually on her side. The optimism in the story was made apparent to me during the ensuing class discussions. As you can see from my experience with A Worn Path, sometimes we need to explore beyond the text to gain a deeper understanding of a story. In the case of a play, seeing the work performed is almost critical to understanding it, and I can attest to this, having attended Sacred Heart's production of The Tempest. I'd heard of this play before, having seen it alluded to in other creative works, so I've been eager to read this story for some time. I still haven't read it, but now I've seen it, and that is just as good, if not better. The production was impressive, and I think I understood it much better seeing it being performed than I might have just reading it. The other most memorable experience I've had in this class was reading Amy Tan's story, Two Kinds. I really identified with Jing Mei on an extremely personal level. I've never played the piano, but I did have a prolonged and abortive attempt at soccer, and there was a time when my mother insisted, erroneously, I must have an eidetic memory. As a result, Two Kinds is the most heavily annotated story in my book, and not for any academic purposes. I was inscribing my own personal ruminations, exploring the different ways the story mirrored my life, responding to it like I was writing a diary entry. The story taught me a bit more about human complexity, and it taught me that I mustn't allow pride, be it my own or the pride of others, be it just or unjust, to impede upon my family relationships. That might be the highlight of my semester, getting this real relevant moral lesson. Even if I learned nothing else these past few months, even if I failed this course, I would still venture to call my experience here worthwhile having read Two Kinds.